Well, hey guys, we are kicking off a brand new series this week. So excited for it. It is called, does anyone have any guesses? The Peak Life, yes. It is a brand new series we're starting. We're gonna be in this for the next 6 or 7 weeks. And I'm really excited about this because we're actually teaching one of Jesus's messages that he gave. It's considered to be one of the greatest messages that Jesus ever gave, and it's called the Sermon on the Mount. And we're gonna be looking at some of these teachings that Jesus did at this, where Jesus was literally up on a mountain, much like when we're talking about the peak life. He was up on a mountain teaching these people, and hundreds and thousands gathered around to hear what he said. And it really is a great teaching. It dives into how we be obedient to God. It dives into areas of our life that maybe we need to give to God, how we live in love, how we live in grace, how we live in wisdom, how we be discerning. And it begins to touch on all of these areas. And so we're gonna be touching on all of these areas over the next 6 weeks. And really what he's saying is, hey, this is how you have the best life. I'm not sure if you've ever had that thought before, like, hey, if I had my choice of all the lives that I could live, I just think, just me personally as a pragmatic person, like I want the best one. Is anyone else there with me? Yeah, I think a bunch of pragmatic people in the room, I like it. I want the best one, and Jesus is saying, hey, I can tell you how you can have the best life, how you can experience the best life. And for this, we're calling it the peak life. In modern terminology, words change in meaning, but right now, especially in modern vernacular or slang or the way people use words, peak has a specific meaning. It can mean the best of something. It can mean the highest. It can mean the strongest, the most skill, the most outstanding, the absolute greatest. We use it for the tops of a mountain, right? Have you ever heard of a peak before? So we use it for the tops of a mountain because it is the top. You can't go higher than the peak. I actually have a picture here from when I was visiting the Rocky Mountains a couple years ago. This is me. That was little wit guy 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. He was 2 months old. And so this was kind of like one of those like Mufasa scenes, right? Like Simba over the edge of the mountain. I had some like Cheeto dust on my finger and I put it on his forehead as we were getting started. But no, we were up on a mountain. I'm not sure if you've ever been up on like a mountain before. How many people have been up on like a mountain before, right? Like I'm not talking about like Kennesaw Mountain or like Stone Mountain. Okay, Mount Everest, someone's been on Mount Everest. This was the Rocky Mountains. This was a mountain. It took us like an entire day to drive up the point that we could drive to and just to drive back down to get to the other side. An entire day of just driving just to travel this mountain range. And we would stop at these different peaks. And if you know anything about mountains, as you climb in elevation, it gets harder to breathe. And we would have to make these stops because even though we weren't physically walking, it was just getting hard for us to breathe as we climbed in elevation. And so that was a peak moment. You know, it was a great moment. It was an outstanding moment. And as we were traveling the mountain peaks, and for this, for Jesus's message, the Sermon on a Mountain Peak, literally, it was considered a peak message, right? And I'm not just saying that it was a great message because like I'm here to talk to you and I have to say that. That's literally what the people that heard the message said. If you will look with me in Matthew chapter 7, verse 28. It says, and when Jesus, this is at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, he finishes it. It's kind of through Matthew chapter 5 through 7, and we'll be going over that over the next couple of weeks. It says, and when Jesus finished these sayings, the crowds were astonished at his teaching, for he was teaching them as one who had authority and not as their scribes. There was something about the way that Jesus taught them in this moment that was different than anything that they've heard before. There was something about the way that he touched on the topics that he did that was different and better and greater than anything that he had taught before. And that's why it's considered one of his best sermons he ever gave. A lot of time you'll hear this is his best sermon ever. And as he's going to dive into all of these topics, and we're going to be looking at a lot of different topics over the next couple of weeks. We're going to be looking at worry and anxiety. We're going to be looking at anger and unforgiveness. We're gonna be looking at lust and adultery. We're gonna be looking at a lot of these topics that Jesus spoke into, but what you're going to see as Jesus is talking about these actions and these behaviors, what he's really getting after is he wants your heart in these areas of your lives. He doesn't just want you to change your behavior because he's asking you, he wants to get behind the behavior to the thing driving your behavior. He doesn't just want your actions to change. He wants the desires that lead you to those actions to change. He is getting at the heart of the issues of these things that he is going to be discussing. He is not just after your actions. He is after your heart. And today, as we kick this off, he is going to talk about being salt and light. I'm not sure if you've asked the question to yourself today, why did we serve pretzels today? Maybe you've asked yourself that. I have one of our pretzels right up here. Anyone enjoy the pretzels? Yeah. All right. Why am I saving the pretzel? So I could show it to you right now in this moment. I'm not going to eat it because then I'm not going to talk. I'm going to get dry mouth and it's going to be salty. I'll probably start sweating. It's going to be really awkward for both of us. And it's just better that we just don't go down that road. But here's what I'm saying. The reason that we had it is because Jesus is going to talk about being salt today, and pretzels are, and some of you guys are right now. Yeah, you are right now, all right? But that's what Jesus is going to be talking about today. And so if you have some Bibles around you, if you brought your Bible with you, we're gonna get started near the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5, verse 13. And so if you want to turn with me there, we're gonna kind of hear what Jesus has for us today in this message. Verse 13 is where we're gonna be starting, Matthew chapter 5, verse 13. He says, "You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. And in the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven." So Jesus is beginning to breach this topic, and he's using an illustration here. He said, hey, I want you to be salt and I want you to be light. And can I tell you, his audience would have probably had the same reaction that you do today. What does what you're saying have to do with salt and light? Like, well, what are you asking me to do? What are you saying here? And the reason, I'm gonna get there in a second, but I wanna give you the why before I give you the what. The reason that Jesus is wanting us to be salt and light is because the world needs us to. It doesn't take long to look at the world around us and say, hey, there is something wrong here. There is something broken here. You just have to look in the past couple weeks. Most of you should be aware of what happened last week in school shooting in a community close to our own. You've probably felt that over the last week or so, and something deep inside you, as you see officers around your campus, as you see things in the news, as you hear conversations happening, something inside of you should say, this is not right. There's something wrong here. Today, this day specifically, we're remembering what happened in September 11th when terrorists attacked our country and many, many, many lives were lost. And when we think about that moment, and for those of us who were there and experienced that moment, we would say, hey, there's something that is not right here. There's something wrong. Just a couple of days ago, we got a text message. I would say we were actually getting ready to watch a movie, and my wife pulled up her phone. She kind of gasped and showed me this text message, and it was her sister. And she said, hey, we can't find Christopher. We've been looking for a couple of hours. Can you please pray? And so this is my nephew who's 3, about to turn 4. And so we don't know what to do. We just pray, and we're kind of sitting there. We're like, do we ask for more information? Do we just sit here and wait? We're not really hearing anything and really just thinking, man, how they live on a farm out in Rome, 40 acres. He could pick a direction, and he could be any direction around. And so they're scared, and we're praying. And then about hour and a half later, we get a text message that says, hey, we found Christopher. He was hiding under our bed. And so, yeah, little 3-4-year-old, and we were following up with them the other day, and the reason I tell you is that, like, if you're sitting in that moment and that's how we felt, we're saying, hey, something's not right here. This shouldn't happen, right? There's something wrong with it. And we're following up with them the other day. We're like, what happened? What was that conversation like? And like, well, he's 3, turning 4. He knew he was in trouble. We were just happy he was safe, but we didn't trying to figure out, like, do we get on? Like, what do we do? Not trying to scare him, but trying to scare him. And so all of these things. And so we really didn't say much. He didn't say anything the whole night. The next morning he wake up, he didn't say anything. And it was around lunch. He looked over to my sister-in-law, Bethany. He says, that was a good hiding spot, wasn't it? And it's super cute, but you hear something like that and you're like, there is something wrong in the world, right? And so, but he's sweet, he's okay. But even just 2 days ago, my younger brother had his first child. And so they were texting us, but there were some complications with birth. And they actually didn't get to see their son for 12 hours after birth because they were just monitoring and checking this and checking that. And they're just sitting there like, can you just tell us something? What's going on? And they just didn't know. And you're just sitting there and like there's all of these moments that you experience in all the different places of the world that should tell you, and you feel it inside, there is something wrong. And that's why Jesus is talking here. He's saying there's something wrong in the world, but you can do something about it. Here's my first point for you today, students. The world needs salt and light because it is decaying and dark. The world needs salt and light because it is decaying and dark. The teaching that Jesus did right before he said, hey, go be salt, go be light, is called the Beatitudes, where he's literally saying these are the attitudes that you need to be. These are the characteristics that the people that follow me look like. This is what it looks like to be kind. This is what it looks like to be generous. This is what it looks like to be humble. This is what it looks like to follow me. And then he's saying, hey, it's not just about being those things, but you're supposed to be those things in a world that is dark. You're supposed to be those things in a world that is decaying. You're supposed to be those things in a world that is broken, and you are supposed to make a difference in those places. I said 2 words, decaying and dark. I want to help you understand those. When I say decaying, this is what I mean. That the effect of sin is causing the influence of sin to continue growing and growing and growing, and the power of sin gets darker and darker and more as time goes on. And you probably have heard this conversation, even with what's happened in the last couple of weeks, where you're talking to a grandparent or something, they're saying like, this is crazy to me. We never experienced things like this. And it just seems that over time, things are getting worse and worse and worse, and it's because the world is decaying. God created something that was good, but sin broke that, and it is getting worse and worse. And because of that, the world is dark. Here's what I mean by dark. That there are places and people that are stuck in the influence and power of sin. When it talks about darkness, it's saying that there are people and places that are stuck under the power and stuck under the influence of sin. Those are dark things. Those are dark places. Those are dark activities, and it is just getting worse. Here's how the Apostle Paul says this in Romans chapter 1. He talks about, hey, you want to see what the effect of sin growing and growing in the world, getting darker and darker and decay happening. This is what it looks like. Romans chapter 1, verse 21. He says, for although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man, and birds and animals and creeping things. Therefore, God gave them up in the lust of their hearts to impurity, to the dishonoring of their bodies among themselves, because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worship and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. And here is what he's saying. He's saying, hey, as the effect and as the influence of sin grows and grows and grows, it takes this perfect thing that God creates and it breaks it more and more and more and more. And remember, I said that in these series of messages that Jesus is talking about how he's coming after your heart. He's talking about how you can get to the heart of the issue. I'm not sure if you heard that word in there. It mentioned it said that their foolish hearts were darkened. Well, what was dark? We talked about that earlier. It's the power of sin and the influence of sin on people and places. Their hearts became dark. And then it says that he gave them over to their dark desires. It gave them over to their dark impulses. He gave them over to those dark things. He said, hey, there's a point. I've been trying to protect you. I've been trying to protect you. I've been trying to protect you. But if all you want is darkness and all you want is decay, you can go experience the consequences of that. That's where it leads. Like I said, it's not just about our actions. He's coming after the heart. And the reality is that the power of sin and the influence of sin wants to change the way you think, and it wants to change your heart, and it wants to change your desires to want those dark things, to want those things that are being broken and decayed. And those things are not compatible. The thing that Jesus is talking about, he says, hey, I'm building a kingdom. I'm building a people. They're supposed to be salt. They're supposed to be light. And the darkness has no place among them. Here's how the Apostle Paul says it a few chapters later in Romans chapter 8, verse 8. He says, those who are in the flesh cannot please God. He says, hey, if you are operating in the darkness, if you're operating in your flesh, if your heart has become darkened and you've been giving in to those desires and going to those dark places, he doesn't say it's hard to please God. He doesn't say it's unlikely to please God. He says you cannot please God. I feel like that's the reason that Paul is talking so strongly here, is because he's seeing people that he loves and he's seeing people that he cares about, and he sees them being pulled and pulled further into deeper and darker things. And here's the reality, like I'm very interested in brain science and how sociologists study people and how people think. And here's what they would say. People don't just wake up one day and jump to the worst, deepest, darkest place. That's not how humanity works. That's not how our brain works. It's one small step into the darkness. It's, hey, today I'm just gonna do this, but it's okay. Other people are doing it. It's not that big of a deal, and we justify it, and then we take one more step into the darkness. And we justify it and say it's okay, and we look at a broken world and say, hey, it's okay, they're all doing it, and we take one more step and one more step and one more step until we find ourselves in a place that we never thought we'd be, doing things that we never thought we would do. And it didn't start there, it started over here, and that's why Paul's saying, hey, you can't please God because that road only goes one direction. It gets darker and darker and darker and darker. So he says two things. He says, hey, we're supposed to be salt and we're supposed to be light. I want to talk about those two things real quick. What does salt do? Well, it preserves and it seasons. Those are the two things that the functions that salt does. Some of you have tasted the effect of its seasoning as you munched on a pretzel earlier today. But it preserves and it seasons. Here's what I mean by preserves, especially before the modern technology of refrigeration. If you wanted meat or different types of food to last longer so it didn't start rotting and decaying and being gross and icky and all those other things, you would put a lot of salt on it because salt preserves things. It slows down the decay. It slows down the process of it getting bad. And in the same way, he's saying, hey, you want to know what your role is as someone who is following me? You're supposed to look at a broken and dark world, and you're supposed to slow the influence of sin in the world. You're supposed to slow this descent into darkness. Like you have a role to play. You're supposed to be a preserving agent in the world. Maybe you've heard a commercial where they're talking about a food and it's saying, hey, there's no added preservatives in here. They're saying, hey, that means that there is nothing added into this that's supposed to make it last longer or to slow down the decay. And that's what God's saying. He's saying, hey, you are a preserving agent in a broken world meant to slow down this decay into craziness, into darkness, into depravity, into the worst possible things happening if no one stands up and says, this is wrong. If no one lives a life and says, hey, there's a better way. He says we're supposed to stand in that gap and say, hey, there's a good God. It doesn't have to be this way. We're meant to be a force of good in this world, and we're supposed to be actively affecting the decay of the things around us. So I want to ask you a question, student. How are you affecting the decay, the influence of sin getting darker and darker in your schools, on your sports teams, in your homes? Maybe you think, hey, I'm just a kid and I don't have the ability to do anything. You have the ability through your obedience to what God has called you to do to affect the effect of sin in your home. You have the power to do that. But before we can affect the influence of sin outside of us, we have to deal with the effect of sin inside of us. You see, we can't be a force of good in the world and stopping decay and stopping sin if we're still in the darkness, if our life is about the deep, dark things and decaying. Here's how Jesus says this in a passage in Mark. Verse 9, he uses some of the very similar language that he uses in the Sermon on the Mount. This is Mark chapter 9, verse 43. He says, and if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. It is better for you to enter life crippled than with two hands to go to hell, to the unquenchable fire. And if your foot causes you to sin, cut it off. It is better for you to enter life lame than with 2 feet and be thrown into hell. If your eye causes you to sin, tear it out, for it is better for you to enter the kingdom of God with 1 eye than with 2 eyes to be thrown into hell, where their worm does not die and the fire is not quenched. Now, you probably feel the same way that most people feel, which is saying, hey, Jesus, it sounds like you're being a little extra right now. Right? It sounds like you're mad. It sounds like you didn't get your food on time at the restaurant you ate recently. It sounds like you're hangry. It sounds like something's going on because you are lit up here. You're saying some hard things. You even said hell. You said it 3 times. Jesus, what is going on here? Remember, I said Jesus is after your heart, not just about the actions. He is after your heart. And here's what he says in the very next verse. This is how it connects. He says, for everyone will be salted with fire. Salt is good, but if salt has lost its saltiness, how will you make it salty again? Have salt in yourself and be at peace with one another. And here's what he's saying here. He's saying, hey, if you are living your life in dark places, it's better for you to get rid of the things that are leading you to those dark places than find yourself not following Jesus and ending up in hell. He's saying, hey, you might need to make some extreme changes in your life. You might need to get rid of friendships that are leading you into dark places. You might need to get rid of habits that are leading you into dark places. Whatever it takes to get out of these dark places isn't worth where those dark places are going to lead you, which is away from Jesus. He's saying it's not worth it. And then he talks about salt. He's saying, hey, don't lose your saltiness. Don't lose your ability. Don't lose the thing that God has put in you to change the world around you because you get stuck in the dark things. Because your life is decaying and you can't make a difference outside of yourself because you're not willing to make a difference inside of yourself. The other thing he talks about is seasoning. We're supposed to be able to make a difference. We should bring life into things. We should make things taste better. What he's saying is, hey, as you are following me, as you are being obedient, as you are going into dark places, as you are seeing the decay in the world, you should be operating in a way that says, hey, life is better when I'm around this person. Things are better when I'm around this person because God's in the midst of it. You should live your life in a way that when people see the way that you act, see the way that you talk, see the way that you care for them, even if they don't even know Jesus, that they're like, hey, I don't know, there's something about them and there's something about this God, just being around them feels right. We should be adding flavor. We should make everything better. And here's what I would say. He talks about how we should interact with one another. He said that we should be at peace with one another. Here's what I would say to that. Some of you guys need to be salt and not salty. I'll say it again because I don't think you heard me the first time. You need to be salt, not salty. You see, you're waving the flag of Jesus and you're saying you love and you care for people and you're about God's kingdom and you're about living this best life and you want to make these changes and you want to change the world, but when it comes to how you treat the people around you, that looks nothing like what Jesus is about. That looks nothing like the kingdom that Jesus is building. We should be known for making things better. We preserve and we season. Here's my point for you about being salty, students. The world will see God as worthy when they see a church that is salty. The world will see God as worthy when they see a church that is salty, when they see a church that is so different, that brings life to things, that make everything better, that they step into a community and needs are being met. That they step into a community, they step on a sports team, they step into a friend group and they bring the people up around them, not down. When people begin to see that, they say, hey, there's something different about them. They make everything better. They bring life into things. Man, there's something about their God. The other thing he talks about is light. What does light do? Light does two things. Light reveals and it guides. Here's a passage in Matthew again that we read earlier, but specifically talking about light. Matthew chapter 5, verse 14. He says, you are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand. And it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. He's saying, hey, you are called to shine your light. And we talked about darkness. Darkness is the influence and power of sin in places and people. And he says, hey, you're supposed to go to those people. You're supposed to go to those places, but you're not supposed to be about the things that they're about. You're supposed to bring the light with you and go into the places. Here's the thing, if you don't know this about darkness, darkness is just the absence of light. You see, you have the ability when you step into dark places to brighten it up immediately. That's all darkness is. It's the absence of light. And when you step into the places and step around the people who are under the power and influence and the effect of sin, and you step in, things get brighter. Things begin to change. We shine our light by stepping into those places. We should have a presence in this lost and broken world. You see, and it's not just, he says, hey, do these good deeds, these good works, and give glory to God the Father so that he gets the glory. But here's the thing, the world can do good works. A lot of times the church will say things like the church is the only one that can do good. Hey, there's a lot of people that can do a lot of good, but God's not getting the glory in those things. He says we're supposed to operate in a way by even when we're doing the good works, it's how we do the good works that gives God the glory, right? We need to be people that can do good works without complaining, that we can do good works, that we can rejoice about the good works even when we're not getting the credit, that we can do good works and that we can celebrate what God's doing even if other people are misinterpreting our intentions. Even if we're rejected in the process and they don't receive it, that we are still joyful about what God's doing in the midst of it. And that we're operating in a way that makes God look glorious. The passage talks about, hey, people don't light a light. I'm not sure how many times, maybe you have a light in your room. Like maybe it's dark, right? I'm not sure. Did anyone grow up being scared of the dark? Anyone? It's okay, this is a safe place. Just mental picture, all of you people, I'm gonna come scare you. No, you're scared of the dark, right? So what do? Turn on a light. He's saying, hey, if the darkness is bad and the darkness is scary, you don't turn on a light and then immediately cover it. It's serving no purpose. It's doing no good. For those of us in this room who are saying, hey, I follow Jesus. I want to make a difference. I want to be obedient. I want to do these things, but you're not doing them visibly. You're not doing them out and in the open where a broken and lost world can see it. You're just like, well, hey, I'm worried about what they'll think about me if I say things about Jesus. I'm worried about what they'll say about me if I do things for Jesus. Can I tell you, he's saying, hey, it serves no purpose. It's not doing any good if you cover it up, if you hide it. And I would even take it a step further. I would say it's disobedience, because God has called you to be a light. He has called you to be salt, a preserving agent in a broken world that brings life to things, that brings joy to things. He's called you to be a light. And that means for you to be a light, that means you have to go to the dark places and be visible and be a person in a place that reveals a good God and guides people to him. When they're stuck in dark places, when they're stuck in dark sin. Here's what I want to say about light, students. The more places we shine our light, the more others give glory to God. You see, when we take our light into dark places, God gets the glory and other people begin to glorify God. He gets the glory. And like I said earlier, there's a lot of darkness and sometimes it can be overwhelming. Hey, can I even make a difference? We look at what's going on in the recent weeks, what we're remembering today. Just even things, I'm not sure if you've heard this before, there's an election coming up, right? And you're gonna be hearing a lot of things about how you should vote and where you should vote and Christian values and this policy and that policy. And can I tell you something, students? God isn't asking for you to vote for a specific president to make a difference. He's asking you to live a life of obedience to make a difference. And I'm not saying you that when you're old enough that you shouldn't vote and you shouldn't vote on Christian values, but what I'm saying is that's not how he created difference to be made in the world. He said difference is going to be made when you're full of salt. And when you're full of light and you're going into dark places and telling them all about what God's done and who he is and what he's about. Here's my last point for you students. God uses our obedience to be different, to make a difference. He uses our obedience to be different, to make a difference. You have the ability to make a difference, to literally change the world around you, to change your schools, change your teams, change your neighborhoods, to change your homes. Some of you have family members that don't know Jesus and aren't plugged into church. Can I tell you, you have the ability to have influence over the effect and evil of sin, but it starts when you say, hey, I'm gonna be salt. I'm going to be light. And I'm gonna go into the dark places. I'm gonna be about the things that Jesus is about, and people are going to see a difference in me. And when we're different, it makes a difference. Pray with me.